record? Hi, you are listening to the Mito Podcast. I am Ashley.
And I'm Megan.
And we have a special guest with us today, and we're talking to her all the way out in the UK. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. My name's Louise, and I'm a Mito mum here in the UK to a little boy called Freddy, he'll be 5 in September actually, and he has a version of Lee syndrome.
And I actually met you through Instagram. You were one of the first families that I found when Angie got her diagnosis. When I started kind of looking for just more information, the UK popped up a lot more for me than the United States. So that's kind of how I found you.
That's interesting that the UK popped up a lot.
Yeah, I think I saw maybe 3 families before I found anybody in the US, but you were very helpful to me. You were also one of the first people that I spoke to. So it was nice to see that your story was on Instagram and that there was somebody that I could look at pictures or I could read your story. And that's why I thought it would be great to talk to you on the podcast, just to one, get another story out, and for you to maybe just talk about Freddy and see how your story or your Mito journey began.
Yeah, of course. Well, I don't know where to start really. If I start from when Freddie was born, I had him at home, my choice. I wanted the irony of this whole thing is having to have operations myself for fertility and having spent a lot of time in hospital myself, I decided I wanted to have my baby at home with as little medical intervention in his life as possible. My pregnancy had been wonderful. His birth, nothing went wrong. Everything was perfectly fine. It was as soon as he came into the world, it was apparent something wasn't right. He wasn't breathing. He needed to be resuscitated. He couldn't feed. We were both rushed to hospital straight away. He spent 6 days in special care. He had seizures. He had an emergency dose of phenobarbital to stop those seizures. They stopped them within 48 hours. He had an MRI. He was a day old, I think, when he had that. I found it incredibly traumatic. And they found a bit of blood at the back of the brain, which they said was perfectly normal to see after a vaginal birth. And then he started feeding, and everything from there went up, and everything was good, and we were discharged home. And he was hitting milestones. He was doing what he should be doing when my friends' children were doing it. You know, he in no way, shape or form did he seem different until around 6 months. So I can talk now, having pieced all the information together from what happened then, and understanding Mito. It's funny because once you get the diagnosis, certain things fall into place, don't they? Whereas at the time you had all the pieces, but you couldn't put them together. And then with hindsight, all of a sudden you can see the jigsaw right in front of you and what it's supposed to look like. So he'd got a chest infection. And I'm sure you guys know as well that quite often the onset of the condition can happen. If it's not evident immediately, it can happen and be triggered by them getting poorly, because then the Mito struggles and it compromises things. And then the body just says, well, I don't have the energy to cope with all of this. So he lost milestones at that point at 6 months. At the time, I didn't really realise. I just knew something was wrong. I didn't realise the extent of it. I just knew he suddenly seemed different. He'd lost his emotion. He didn't smile anymore. He didn't cry anymore. I called, we have health visitors here in the UK who come out and help you for, I think, well, they don't help you, but they check, they do medical checks and welfare checks. She reassured me that he was just a content child, content 6-7 month old, and that's why he wasn't crying. Didn't really feel comfortable with that myself. He didn't seem to roll over anymore. I couldn't remember when he'd rolled over. He wasn't sitting up. So he, because of everything that had happened at the time of his birth, he was under a paediatrician, which you don't, everyone who has a baby here in the UK isn't automatically allocated a paediatrician. We just go to a general doctor. Whereas if you've had some sort of trauma around birth or when they're first born, then you're allocated a paediatrician to see regularly. So James made an appointment to see his paediatrician the day before. So he was 8 months old now. The day before the appointment was on a Monday. The Sunday evening, it had been really hot weather and he was still coughing a bit. So this cough it hadn't really gone. He'd had antibiotics. He'd struggled a lot more than we appreciated. He'd struggled at the time. He started making strange body movements that we hadn't seen. He was flinging both of his arms up above his head at the same time. Coinciding with this, he was holding his breath whilst this was happening, and it was repetitive. So we rang not an ambulance, we rang the stage before that to ask for help and say, what do we do? This is happening, our baby's 8 months old. And an ambulance was dispatched immediately on the basis if they thought he was having seizures. When the ambulance got to our house, the paramedics came in and they took a blood sample from his foot, and he didn't even flinch. He didn't no awareness of what had happened. And the paramedic just looked at me in the eyes and said, "Is that normal for him?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "It's not normal. He's an 8-month-old baby. He should be crying. I've just put a needle in his heel and he's not even flinched." I got in the ambulance with him. He continued to seize the whole way to hospital. We got to hospital and one of the doctors came out and said, can you tell me about his development? How's his development? And because we were seeing the paediatrician the next day, or due to see the paediatrician the next day, we'd made a list of everything. We'd gone through, thank goodness for mobile phones, we'd gone through videos, we'd gone through photos, we'd documented everything that he wasn't doing or everything that had changed. So I looked at this doctor and said, "Funny you should ask. He doesn't roll over anymore. I don't know when he last cried." And I saw the doctor's face change. And that's when I knew this was serious and he was really, really concerned. So that was the Sunday night. The Monday morning, they did an MRI. Or was it an EEG? Perhaps the Monday morning they did an EEG. It was seizure activity. He was diagnosed with infantile spasms. Quite an aggressive type of seizure, fairly common with all types of Lee syndrome, I think. And on the Tuesday morning, they did an MRI. So what I should probably say here is that he had an MRI, a follow-up MRI, when he was 3 months old, after the one that he'd had at birth. It showed a completely perfectly structured brain, no issues, no problems at all. The MRI he had at 8 months showed a lot of white matter and a lot of brain damage. It was that moment we were sat down and told, this is metabolic, this is a metabolic condition. It might be a mitochondrial disease. We need to start doing more tests. First time I'd ever heard the term mitochondrial disease. So you ask, what's that? What is it? Is it like cerebral palsy? Like how do we deal with this? And that's when you hear the words, I'm sorry, I'm going to get emotional. I'm sorry, there's no cure. It's life limiting and there's nothing we can do. And I remember, like, Freddie was in hospital at this point, seizing like constantly on and off all day. And I remember James, my husband, turning round and just saying, how long do we have then? And I just remember the doctor saying, it's not going to be immediate, but I can't tell you, I'm afraid. And then the next day, the Wednesday, he had a lumbar puncture because they wanted to get the best sample of lactic acid that they possibly could. I think from at that point, they were convinced it was mitochondrial. He had high lactic acid. He did at birth as well, but at the time, I never asked anyone about it. I didn't know. And that's when they started doing blood tests to try and locate the gene. They told us it could take months, and they didn't. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, isn't it? There's so many different types. And that day as well, he started intensive steroids for his seizures. So it was the Wednesday we finally got his seizures under control. He had a particularly bad one immediately after his lumbar puncture and he needed oxygen. And I just remember carrying him back from that room after the lumbar puncture and watching his body just start convulsing in my arms. And I ran to his bed and I put him down and I slammed the emergency button. And it was like slow motion. Every doctor and nurse ran to his bedside. And I just remember standing there thinking, this can't be my life. Like, who lives like this? What, nobody talks about it. No, but I've never met anybody who's had a sick child, a sick baby before. And I just remember and the nurse turned to me and said, Mum, can you step inside the curtains? They were drawing the curtains around his bed. And I remember everything so vividly from that week in hospital. But and I guess you guys have periods like this as well, when it's so vivid and everything is so clear, but it's also like a dream. Because you almost just can't believe it's happening to you. So that was when we found out it was mitochondrial disease. It was the Saturday we were sent home. We didn't want to leave hospital. His paediatrician basically convinced us and said, this is your new life and you need to go home, the three of you, and work out how you move forward. We'll be there. You have open access to the hospital, I know it's different for you guys. We have a free healthcare service. You guys obviously have insurance and things work a bit differently. For us, we had, at that time, Freddie was allocated an epilepsy nurse, a neurologist. At another hospital, he was also allocated a specialist neurologist, a more senior hospital to our local hospital. He was given a physio. He was given a speech and language therapist. So we were encouraged to go home. This is the support you're going to have. You're not going to be left on your own. We're going to help you. We can offer support. We can offer supplements, and we can hold your hand and walk it with you. At that time, he was the only child in our area under our hospital. His neurologist, she'd come across children that hadn't had a confirmed diagnosis of mitochondrial disease. He was the first child she had that was confirmed. And we didn't, it was almost like going home meant it was real. And that was really, really hard, going into hospital knowing something wasn't quite right, thinking a lot of different things, but all things that still saw me seeing my son grow up into a man, and then coming home feeling like someone's just turned your whole world upside down. And what made it even worse was nobody knew what to say to us. You know, friends, family, nobody knew what to say. The most common thing is, science is great, science is coming on, there'll be a cure, they'll fix him, it's going to be fine. And like you guys know as well as I do, not for a long time. It's, you know, my husband and I do all we can to fundraise here, but we're doing it in Freddie's name, but we know he's not going to benefit from it. It will be someone who's probably not even thought about having children yet. Do you know what I mean? Or maybe even their child. It will be them who benefit from it. But you have to do it because it's your hope. And then we came home to our new life and found out that all the blood tests that they'd taken, they couldn't find anything. So we were then asked to go into another appointment with the specialist neurologist that I mentioned, who had a specialist interest in mitochondrial disease. And she examined him. She took one look at him and turned around to his local neurologist and said 3 gene mutations she wanted him tested for. And she said, I'd like the blood tests done now and we'll get them back when we get them back. And then it was the day after his first birthday, we were called for an appointment at her hospital, which is further away. And I think we were there for the appointment was about 3 hours. And we were told the gene mutation he had, of the specific type of Lee syndrome he had. His epilepsy nurse came with us from our local hospital so that she could sit in on it as well. And because we had Mito professors there, and there was quite a team there that we met to answer all our questions and tell us everything they knew, I guess. So that was the start of our journey.
I'm impressed that your hospital knew about mitochondrial disease. I know we hear so many stories, and just on our own mito journeys, a lot of doctors and, you know, different facilities aren't even familiar with it. So I'm glad that you came into contact very early with people who, you know, at least if they weren't experts in it, they knew of it and they knew that they needed to send you on for further testing. That's a good start that a lot of people don't actually even receive.
Yeah, and I think that is the part of our story. And I think some people who don't live in our world think, it's strange of me to say, but I always say we're lucky. Like, we're lucky with how he was diagnosed, who he saw. We were really, I know people years and years down the line are still, maybe it's my tweet that, like, we don't know. And do feel like we were really lucky. They were on the ball. Everything was very quick. They knew what they were looking for. They knew what tests they needed to do, and it was bang, bang, bang. And, you know, and we started getting answers. And I do feel really great. At the time I didn't, because I didn't want to know. At the time I wanted to live in this ambiguous bubble and just not know, because then I couldn't be hurt if I didn't know. But now, you know, years later, I feel really grateful for that part of our journey.
You said when you were talking about when they were first basically giving you the definition of the lifespan, we had a doctor tell us similar, that, you know, we're just on the cusp. Like, we research and science is almost there. We're so close to a cure. And when you first hear that, when you first get this diagnosis and you hear that, when you hear close, you think, okay, there's a chance, there's hope, it's around the corner, like, that's not far away. And then as you get more into your journey and you research a little bit more, you realize around the corner is not close. It's not at the front door. It's still very far away.
Go ahead.
Almost false sense of hope that your child, that they're going to make it, and you still hope that. I mean, you can't take away that. You still, no matter what, want that to happen, so you can't lose that hope. But it is very hard to hear that we're close. And essentially, if you think about 50 years, yeah, we are a lot closer, even the last 10 years, especially with genetic testing and things like that, getting the diagnosis. And I think once genetic testing gets better, maybe the so-called cure will be around the corner, because we're getting a better idea of who's affected by Mito and what kind of Mito.
And I think for a doctor, with all the knowledge that they have, and when they're talking to a parent close to them, could be 20, 30 years. It's like, I've been working on this for 15, 20 years, and in another 10, maybe we'll have it. But as a parent, you're thinking, oh, a cure for my child, before my child passes away. And, sometimes that's very quickly, and sometimes it's not. But, our timelines are very different than probably what a doctor thinks about, because you're not used to thinking about, well, how long does it take to get a cure? How long does it take for the FDA to approve drugs and, different things like that. I mean, now all the research, we've done, and the symposiums we've been to, and it's like you see the trials and you see all the time that it takes, and it's just, it's an extensive amount of work and time. So.
Okay, so we had just left off from talking about hope and where we are with a cure. And with fundraising, that also struck a chord with me too. It not only just gives you, it gives you the little bit of hope to hang on to, but the best part, I think, about fundraising is just getting the word out and reaching people. Because the more people that know about it, the more likeliness that we might be able to inspire kids to be doctors or researchers, scientists, things like that. So it's not just about the money that you're fundraising for an organization, but it's about inspiring knowledge.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we've got a charity, I mean, you've probably seen me mention it on Instagram, here in the UK, called the Lily Foundation. And it was started by Lily's mum, Liz. Lily had mitochondrial disease, and she died when she was still a baby. But at that time, that was 11 years ago this year, is it? I can't remember. But at that time, there was nowhere for Liz to turn to, no one for her to talk to about it. So she started the charity. So that connects, I think it's 300 families in the UK who all have a child or a young adult with a mitochondrial disease diagnosis. So all of the fundraising that we do, my husband and I do in Freddie's name, is for them. Because they not only do they put money into research, they pay for, I think it's 2 researchers at a specialist Mito services clinic here, and they also connect the families. So every year they do a long weekend for families all to get together. They have the specialists that we have here come. So on a Saturday they will do lectures and be available for families who have questions, or most of us will see them with our kids in some capacity anyway. The particular clinic is, I think it's like 5 or 6 hour drive from where we live. So we don't go there so much in person anymore. We speak to them on the phone. We're lucky Freddie's stable, so we don't feel we need that huge input. But we get to see them every year at the weekend, and they let us know about research, drug trials, clinical trials, everything that is or perhaps isn't going on, even things that haven't been successful. And the charity also work with our healthcare system here, the NHS. So between them, they've come up with a website that you can access here that has it's a Mito website, so it has all the main types of Mito and symptoms and diagnosis, and all the information that you would need, and the charity help with that as well. So it just makes you feel like you're doing something, because otherwise you just feel so helpless, don't you?
Yeah,
absolutely.
So can you tell us a little bit about Freddie today?
Yeah, sure. So Freddie he'll be 5 next month. He is stable, so I guess that's how we would say it. He's non-verbal. He can do some signs. He's very communicative with his face. He's very cheeky. He's got the biggest eyes, and the biggest smile, and he can get you to do pretty much anything, just by batting his eyelids at you. He has hypertonia. His epilepsy is very well controlled. He had a regression in 2017, so just before he was 2, and he had to go over to peg feeding. Prior to that, he was orally fed and hydrated. But then he went over to a tube in his tummy to be fed and hydrated that way. This year they actually did a video of him swallowing again, and he's had a huge improvement. So he's allowed to drink again, and he's eating orally again. We still use the tube because he needs it so we can make sure he's getting enough. But I mean, basically we're living in uncharted territory. When we got his diagnosis, we were given a lot of information to read, and that information said children with his gene live on average 2 years following diagnosis. So we take his diagnosis from 8 months, because that's when we found out it was Mito. So as far as we're concerned, he's defying the odds, and he's already going against what we were told, and how we managed our own expectations. We didn't expect that he would still be here. We certainly didn't expect he would have the life that he has. He has a walking frame, so he can't walk unaided, he can't sit unaided. He has equipment, but he is so happy navigating his world in his walking frame. He's so cheeky, and until the pandemic, he was going to nursery 3 days a week, which was huge. Again, it was something that I never even dreamt of. I gave up work to be his full-time carer, as you do, especially when your child's so reliant on you, when they're not verbal, when they need so many medications and so much support. But it took him there to play for a year before I left him, and we trust them. They would ring up and let us know any germs that were anywhere near the place, and we would pick him up and bring him home. Because as we all know, that they can't afford to get sick, and we've had too many instances where things have left him so poorly in hospital that you just can't risk it. But the communication with them was always excellent, and they were always really respectful. It was a mix, special needs nursery and neurotypical child nursery. So it wasn't just Freddie there who had medical complications. Half the kids that they have there have medical complications. So they're very respectful, they're very on the ball, and they're very good at communication. But we never dreamed that far. We never thought he would be able to have that sort of independence and that sort of freedom, and he loved it. And you would take him to nursery and he's already throwing his arms up to his key worker because he wants a cuddle. He doesn't care. Mum, you go home, Mum. I'll see you later for dinner, that's fine. And it was lovely. It was lovely to see him have those relationships of his own. And it was nice to have a bit of rest. whilst I knew that he was, you know, his key workers loved him like their own, and a lot of the staff that work there have medically complex children themselves, which is why they heard about the nursery in the first place, and quite often why they end up working there. It's sad he's not had that for the last 5 or so months, but you know, we're living in our chartered times, aren't we? And he's happy at home. But and even the thought of him turning 5, birthdays I find hard. I don't know. I don't know if that's a common thing, but I will get really emotional about his birthday. Split reason. One, because of the amount of gratitude, because I know far too many people who have lost their children, and it's not natural, and so every achievement, everything we do every day, we're so grateful. But then on the flip of that, I find birthdays really difficult, because will he see another one? What comes next? The next one's in 12 months. That is it's the same for Christmas with me as well. Will there be another Christmas? What will happen in the next 12 months? If there is, what would it look like? How will he be? He can't keep progressing at the rate he is. It will reach a stage, his body just won't allow it, because he won't be able to supply enough energy to keep going at the level he's going. Especially, he's big for his age, he's heavy, and even in hot weather, all of a sudden he can't do anything, because his body's just going, oh, this is too much, I can't keep, this battery can't keep running at this level. You know, I know you guys, you know, very competent, understand how it works, and so that is difficult. Birthdays, I find a real mix emotion. And then he's due to start school in September, and that I think I've put my head in the sand and ignored a bit that it's supposed to be happening. When we got his infantile spasm diagnosis, we were given a lot of information to read at that stage, and the statistics were 1 in 5 children diagnosed with infantile spasms don't reach their first birthday. Further, 1 in 5 will never make it to school. We had prepared that school was never going to happen. Like, emotionally, we had prepared that happen with Freddie. That wasn't going to happen in our family. As much as you can, something like that, like, we never head to it. So that I'm struggling with at the moment. I think he's ready for it. Since he loves the children, he loves being around other people. He's very social. He's very happy with other people, and he adores children, tries to copy what, you know, neurotypical children do, and wants to be like them, and loves watching. But emotionally, it's difficult for me to navigate.
When we had Angie, we were obviously told all the same information, and it was terrifying to think of her ever going to school. And we did have a class that she was welcome into once a week. We were allowed to go in if we chose to. And we went maybe twice, and it was awesome. It was great to be around the other kids and the other adults and the teachers, but it was too scary, because every time I looked at a toy, I was like, when was the last time that was cleaned? Or what child or adult had that first? Did they wash their hands? When it was too much. And I realized early that I was going to homeschool, and that was my only option, because I wanted to protect her. But at the same time, that was, as she got older, that realization got harder, because she loved people, because she loved kids and being around people and learning. And I remember we had a play date at the house, and we were super careful. We had signs on our house that said, these are our rules. If you enter, you have to wash your hands. You have to sanitize right after. If you feel any type of illness, even if you think it's allergies, don't enter. So when we did get to have a play date, it wasn't very often. But I remember this one play date, and I watched her watch the other child, and I could see the wheels turning in her head, and her trying to mimic what that kid was doing. And it was just, sorry.
Oh, don't apologize.
It was so amazing to just see her brain work, because you have so many doctors tell you all the limitations, and you don't know what they're taking in, and you hope and you treat them like any other child, but you just don't know. And so watching her do that was so amazing, and I felt like I was almost jailing her because she couldn't be around anybody, and I wanted that for her so bad.
I think.
Go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was just going to say she was so smart, and it was amazing to see what she learned from that other kid. It was beautiful.
And I think, Troy is 12 years old, but we've had very much the same experience, like you said, with Freddie. He went to a preschool class that had neurotypical kids and kids with special needs, and he would get so excited just watching the kids. Of course, I would go with him. I'm a teacher, but I was only working 60%, so he would only go in the morning, and I would go with him because, like Ashley said, I was so afraid of surfaces and kids that were sick. And, as much as you get to a point where you're, close with the teachers and the aides in there, it's just, parents send their kids in sick. They send their kids with special,
yeah.
And you can't control that. So it was such a hard thing, but he loved it. He loved it. He loved watching the kids. Still to this day, he loves watching the kids. And he was in that for about 2 years. And then he went into kindergarten, and it was just hard. Their kids were just getting sick, and we had to keep pulling them out. And finally, our district has something called the home hospital program, where the teachers come to the house. And so we started only doing that during flu season. I'd pull them out. And at every IEP meeting, I'm in tears. It's such a struggle to have your child have those experiences and to keep them safe and healthy. It's just such an impossible mix. And I would just, like I said, every IEP meeting, I'm crying, going, well, we're probably going to go in a hospital. And now, for the last probably 3 or 4 years, he's completely been on home hospital. And he doesn't get the interactions with kids that I wish that he did. And that, like you said, sometimes it makes me feel like I'm not doing what I could, or that, you're keeping your kid in jail, but you just have to measure, and do what's best, and think, are you trying to keep your child alive and letting them have the experiences that they need to. I have been staying home for the last 2 years with Troy now. And so before the pandemic, of course, we would go to the library once or twice a week when they would do readings with other kids. And, there's children's museums here that I would go when they do music time, and, just trying to get that interaction with other kids. But it's so scary with Mito, because you just don't know. They can get the flu, and that's it. It's a scary thing.
And I completely agree. And Freddie caught a sickness bug once, and we went to a soft play, and he was hospitalized the next day. He was in hospital for a week. He was sick 3 times. The impact that had on his body, 7 days in hospital. The hospital was shocked. They couldn't believe the impact, the knock-on effect it had had on his body, having this sickness bug. And since then, we don't take him to birthday parties. We, you know, sorry, he can't come, soft play, I can't do that to him. And it is really, really hard. And because you want to give them quality of life, but you want them to be alive. And you never know if you're doing the right or the wrong thing. And that terrifies me about school. At nursery, there was about 10 kids. There'll be 15 kids in his school class. And we have like this, because he's got special needs over here, we have a legal document will be drawn up, or it already has been, of all his needs, everything he needs, what he needs in place. And on that document does say about sickness and how we need to know everything that is happening in that space. But like James and I were talking about it, and I said, but what if he goes there and catches something and he dies? Like, and for me, I think that is the hardest thing about living with Mito, is one day something will happen. Your child will get sick, and I know, like, actually, I know you've lost Angie, and I just, obviously we all try to avoid germs and bugs, and we've got a sign outside our house at the moment, and they just don't know what to do for the best. It's so hard, and you feel guilt with whatever decision you make.
And that never goes away.
No, I'm sure.
It never goes away.
No, it doesn't. And right now, just with the circumstances, I mean, I know that this situation is super difficult on so many people, but when you have a child that, you know, if they caught this, that they would perish, there's no way that they're making it through this. It just makes this whole situation, it's like our worst nightmare. We already battled the flu season and the different things, but a pandemic is like, and when I know it's really hard for my husband when he sees people not taking this seriously, and, you know, we go out running and nobody's wearing a mask and people aren't, you know, following the things. And it's, you know, we know that we look at life from a whole different perspective, but it's just so hard. It's hard. And it doesn't, unfortunately, that never goes away. It's extreme right now, but it's, you know, we have doubt.
In the pandemic, it is especially hard. And, you know, we've been at home for over 5 months now, and I find myself getting really emotional and very responsive to people who aren't respecting the rules, who don't think it applies to them, who think, oh, if I get it, I'm going to be fine. So, you know, it doesn't matter. I can do whatever I want, and aren't thinking about the chain, the knock-on effect that can have. Mm-hmm. And it's, yeah, I think, and I think as lockdown here has eased and people have been getting back to normal, I found myself much more emotional, and I found it much harder because when everyone had to be at home, I felt a bit like, oh, people understand like what flu season is like for us. Mm-hmm. People understand what winter is like for us, how we have to live. People understand why we ask people to wash their hands, why we won't let them come round if they've coughed. Do you know? But then as everyone's in such a rush to get back to normal, they quickly forget, and we're still at home because we're too terrified. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then you know, we keep him at home for this amount of time and then send him to school, and he gets something and the worst happens anyway. Like, what was the point? What was the point in keeping him at home all this time to protect him and not let him see his grandparents and not let him see his aunts and uncles or his cousins? It's scary. School terrifies me. I don't know what we'll do come September.
Yeah, there's no right and wrong answer to that, because it doesn't matter what you choose. As a Mito family, it doesn't matter, because regardless, you will always look at the opposite side of it. Like, you are making the right decision. I think everybody is making the right decisions for themselves right now. And I think that you have to really trust that and believe in that, and kind of put your foot down to yourself, and whatever happens in the future, whatever happens tomorrow or next week or in September or in a year, you just have to know that you're making the best decision for yourself right now. Because it is very, very easy. I can tell you both. I think back about Angie being in the hospital every day, and I have to force myself to believe I made the right decision. It's not easy. And I wish that nobody else would have to feel this way, but that's just kind of par of the course for having a Mito diagnosis. You're always gonna wonder if you should have made a different decision, or what would seem today as a better choice. But you can't change the past. You can only make the best decisions you can for today, and that goes for birthdays too. Having Angie just made me realize you have to go big or go home, and no matter what it is in life, you have to celebrate it. You have to make it the biggest, best event possible, because that is what life is. We don't know when our time is, and we just have to celebrate and try to be as happy as we possibly can.
I know you were speaking about the birthdays and how that makes you feel. I mean, like I said, Troy's 12, and every birthday, like you said, is an emotional thing, and you don't know if there's going to be a next one. And, Troy, I have a very close-knit family. And so every birthday was, all right, where are we going? Are we going to Hawaii? Are we going to Disneyland? Are we, Troy's birthdays have always been these crazy things. I know when I met my husband now, he's not Troy's father, he's his stepdad. He was like, what are we planning for Troy's birthday? I'm like, we don't know if we're going to get another one. So we do as much as we can, as big as we can for him, and whatever he's into, whatever he wants to enjoy, that's what we do, and we do it big. And it's always a small, very small group, but it's just because you just don't know. And it's such a huge thing to make that next year. And I know, the statistics, only 50% of children with Mito live past the age of 10. And it was just like, when his 10th birthday came, it was like, we're here, but how much longer do we have? So it's just, birthdays are super emotional. So that's totally normal that you feel that way. And they're a special time for so many different reasons. So
we're the same. We go big too. I always look up on the calendar what date is it next year, and we already have our plan set from what we would do depending on when it is. And this year we won't be able to, because I wouldn't feel comfortable being out around people. So this year my goal is, I've never made him a birthday cake, and so I'm going to make him the best birthday cake he's ever had. Like that, we can't go out, we can't go away like we normally would, so we're gonna just do it here, just the three of us. We'll have a lovely time. We'll do all his favorite things that he loves doing in a day, which is mainly watching telly and eating cake. So that's what we're gonna do.
Yes, that sounds great.
But talking about Angie and how clever she is, and how you can see her brain going, and how she was taking everything in, and that is the same as Freddie. And I think people see our kids from the outside, and because they're not talking and they're not doing typical things, people think that their brains aren't still going. And Freddie is so clever, and he doesn't miss anything. Like, he surprises me. I can think he's doing one thing, and then maybe I'm eating a biscuit and I can think he's involved in this activity over here, and he'll just go like that and take and I'm just like, how did you even see that I had something? And he doesn't, or he will start laughing at something perhaps James dropped something off the side and he's watching telly and he'll just crack up laughing and look over and James, and I'm like, how do you? Doesn't miss anything. Like, they're so clever.
They really are. What gene is it that Freddy has that's affected?
I need to get this right now. 8993 T to G. Is that it? It's the maternal. It's maternally passed down. What's Angie's? Did you get a gene diagnosis? You do have one, don't you?
I do. I don't remember the numbers. It is maternally inherited, but they haven't found it in me. So they don't know how she got it passed down. They tested down to 1.5%. They did a buccal swab and a blood test, and both it didn't turn up. So it either means that I actually don't have it, or that it was, or it possibly, well, one, it could be so minuscule that they can't find it, or that I may have just had an egg that was bad. And for our listeners, I don't remember if we said this in a previous podcast or not, but they can't test like the rest of my eggs to tell me for sure if it will happen again. So you go through all that testing hoping to have an answer of yes, you have it, so that you don't continue a family. But then when they come back and say, well, we don't know, it's really hard to feel comfortable. You're still kind of in that, you just don't know. You don't know what to do.
So over in the States, do you have any kind of pre-genetic diagnosis testing, or you don't?
No.
Oh, okay. We have that here.
See, what you can do here, if you've already had a child with Mito and you know what gene is affected, it's not 100% of the time, but depending on what gene it is, there might be some tests that you can do with amniocentesis. So you would have to be already pregnant, do the amniocentesis test, and then they would be able to test that one gene. It doesn't work that way with all genes, but there are specific ones that they have been able to test, which is an option for us. Like there's one company in the US that can test for this one gene. I'm actually going to look it up right now so that I can remember what the numbers are. We just spoke with a genetic counselor on our last podcast, and she was able to kind of break it down so that people can understand how to read your genetic testing, because it's also very confusing. There's all these numbers and you don't know what they mean. But hers is 13513, and then the variant is ASP939ASN, which when you get your diagnosis or your genetic test and you look down at that, you're like, what are all of these numbers and letters? They just like throw the alphabet in the air and whatever landed on the floor. That's it. That's the gene.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy, isn't it? I always say it's absolutely fascinating. It really interests me. I just wish it wasn't a part of my life.
Yeah.
But so Freddie has a 96% mutation of the 8993 T to G. I have it at 29%. But over here, in terms of fertility, things work a little bit differently. So we can, at 12 weeks, I think it is, if you're already pregnant, as long as they know the gene, any gene, and that doesn't just extend to Mito, it's anything they can test. But also we have something called pre-genetic diagnosis. So that is a form of IVF. So that is when they can test the embryos at, I don't know if it's 4 days or it's some stage. They can test the embryos and they can tell you the exact, this is for maternally inherited, they can tell you the exact percentage of the eggs. And then you can have transferred a healthy egg in theory. And also we have had approved, I think it's since 2018, mitochondrial donor IVF. Have you heard of that?
Mm-hmm.
So that's been approved here since 2018 as well. Which for listeners, if you don't know what it is, it's where so in terms of Angie and Freddie, their mito has come from the mother, and that part of that mitochondria is only inherited from the mother. So that IVF is when that part of the egg is removed from the mother's egg, and they put, so the mother's egg and the father's sperm, but then they put the mito from a woman who doesn't suffer from a maternally inherited mitochondrial disease, their healthy mito in with that as well. So it's still the mother's genetics other than her faulty mito gene, thus can still result in a healthy pregnancy with a healthy baby.
Yeah, for our listeners too, if you want to do more research on this, it's called 3-person IVF or 3-person donation. It's 2 female eggs at the nucleus and the male sperm. So what she was just explaining was they remove the nucleus from both samples, and they replace yours with the healthy mitochondria and then fertilize that way. It is a lot more practiced in the UK than it is here. Here it has been deemed illegal. It went up for approval in the US in 2019. It was actually the same month that Angie passed away, because they were trying to get the research to prove to be here, because right now everybody goes across seas to be able to get this done. It was denied, but I feel like on that edge of science, we are a little bit closer with it getting approved here. Because I think when they did, and I don't remember the name of the conference, I'd have to look it up, but you can actually watch the conference. They video streamed it. So you can hear, there was like 4 different doctors or researchers that spoke, and they all gave their reasons of why we should be doing this research here in the US. But I think they were on, I feel like there just wasn't quite enough votes for it, but it was super close. So I feel like each year, maybe within the next 3 to 5 years, it probably will get approved here. But the reason that it hasn't been is because they're afraid of doctors or scientists pushing it too far and making perfect babies, which obviously leads into your sci-fi and movies of the perfect soldier type thing, which I'm not saying that's what would happen, but I think that's where the fear is. But imagine what you can do with that kind of research and being able to eliminate diseases, or just learning more about them, and then how to eventually, again, be on the cusp of research to be able to cure them later. Mm-hmm. If we can do that, there has to be a way. Like if we can remove the nucleus and the mitochondria and separate them and replace them with healthy, then we have to be somehow on the cusp of something. I mean, it's hard to believe that we can do that and not be close to finding a cure, but
yeah, the design a baby argument was something that was really all over the media here at the time, and I actually did a radio interview about it with the professor who started the ball rolling over here for 3-person or mito donor IVF. But yeah, I can understand people's fears, but as I said in that interview, this isn't about creating the perfect child. This is about a child's right to a life, and not having a death sentence from the day it was born. It is different, but that's interesting about the US. I might look that up and follow it a bit more closely.
Yeah, it was very interesting. The whole conference, I watched it. It was fascinating. Just the things that they were talking about. I think the reason that they failed is because in the audience, they only had medical professionals. They didn't have families. And I feel if they had had actual families there to represent the other side of it, it would have moved the decision a different direction. Because you have doctors and nurses affected because they've met a patient or somebody has made an imprint on their life. But there's only a level of emotion there. If you have families or parents or just people who have been affected by this, I think that they would see where this could actually lead rather than being scared of the designer baby. I mean, you can still have regulations on that, but we'll see. I feel like that is closer in the next couple of years. I think if they do another conference and they keep trying that, that it will get approved eventually. But there is a doctor in the United States that does do this, but he flies obviously to another country to be able to finish the process. So he will do the beginning stages, the interviews. He can extract your eggs here because that part is all legal. But to do the splicing of like the mitochondria and the nucleus, he has to fly to, I want to say it was Turkey, but I could be wrong. I don't quote me on that one. But he flies out there to finish the process, and then they have a bunch of healthy eggs already there waiting. And so you would fly out to that country to be inseminated, and then you would have to wait there. The process is long, so it's not inexpensive because you have to be there for a month or two, one for the process and then making sure you stay pregnant, and then the testing after that to make sure. But yeah, it is interesting. There's a bunch of research out there, and then we're just on the beginning of that adventure.
I know the biggest problem they're facing here in terms of it is they don't have donors. We don't have egg donors here. There's like 3 years waiting list for egg donors. So a lot of people here fly to other places in Europe if they need eggs for egg donation, because we just don't. I don't know why they're not allowed to advertise here for that service, but because they don't have them, they don't have the donors for the nucleus, for the mito. So I don't know if they have any cases at the moment. But I know they were going to start a campaign to try and make it a bigger thing so that people were aware of it. So, education and advertising, but not necessarily in a recruitment sense, but just to put the information out there to try and encourage people women to step forward.
That's interesting because I feel like in the United States, fertility is such a huge thing. I mean, I know so many people that have gone through fertility treatment, donated their eggs, different things. That's interesting because you always feel like the UK is a little bit more progressive in a lot of the things that they do and medically in terms of what they allow. So that's interesting to know.
I think what they can do is like really on the cutting edge, but it's just having the resources to do it, unfortunately. And I think if women aren't, I don't know why, I guess women are having children later and later, and I don't know what it's like in the US, but it's quite strict criteria to donate eggs here. You have to be, I think it's under 30, and they prefer you to have had your children first. And I think a lot of women these days or here aren't thinking about it until they're already in their 30s. And whereas in Europe, they advertise in universities in some countries for egg donors, and they pay them, and then they get to freeze some as an insurance policy. But for regulation, they're not allowed to do that here. So they just don't have the egg donors is the one thing that they don't really have.
Yeah, it's interesting how each country, we all are working on the same thing, and we each are the missing piece of each other. I had one more question about Freddie. Do you guys, what kind of medications or supplements is he on for like your Mito cocktail?
So Freddie is on a supplement called coenzyme Q10. Do you guys have that as well? So that's the supplement he's on. He's on a lot of medications for his symptoms. So he's on Keppra for his epilepsy. He's on glycopronium bromide to control his saliva and his secretions. He is on omeprazole and erythromycin for his reflux. He is on prophylactic antibiotics 3 times a week. He has those to try and keep any infection at bay. He has a steroid inhaler to try and help keep his lungs strong.
We can
still, did I go? Sorry. What else is he on? Cetirizine for his hay fever. He's also on creams for his eczema, several creams and steroids for his eczema. I'm just trying to picture everything. He's on laxatives and stimulants to help him go to the toilet because everything's a bit sluggish. I think that might be everything. So yeah,
it's amazing.
Everything, it wasn't all introduced at once. We seem to, every now and then we recruit something new. Every now and then a new symptom crops up and we need something else to help. And you think, and I look at him and I think, he's doing so well, he's doing exceptionally well, he's wonderful. And then I open I get like the monthly meds delivery and I'm like, oh, this is why he needs this on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
That's interesting that you said eczema. I don't think we've spoken to anybody, but Troy has eczema really bad as well. And it's
really,
it's like, oh my gosh, the creams and the, trying to stop him from scratching. And it's just like, that is,
I know, it's never ending, is it? He's got his eczema, hay fever and asthma. Poor boy.
Yeah. Troy takes Keppra as well to control his seizures. So
yeah. Has he been on it a long time?
He had a couple seizures when he was about 2, and we didn't know if they were just febrile seizures because typically he was sick when he would have them. But then at one point he had a grand mal seizure and we took him into the emergency room. And I'm not even sure exactly what they did give him to stop him from seizing, but he was up for the next 24 to 48 hours after taking that. And then we did a couple of tests and he ended up having seizures because of the tests. And we're like, the doctors were, let's put him on Keppra. And he didn't have seizures for, once he was put on Keppra, he didn't have seizures for about 7 years. And then probably about 6 months ago, he started having some absent seizures where he would just stare off into space and not respond to anything. And he's never increased his dosage at all since he was 2. So he was on a very, very low dosage. So we just had to do multiple increases because he kept having absent seizures. But he's been pretty good for about a little over a month. He hasn't had any. So, and he hasn't really had side effects as far as we know. One of the things we noticed is he would get a little irritable when we would increase it. But we didn't know if that was him turning into a preteen or the medication. Who knows?
Yeah, it's funny because people have really variable experiences with Keppra, don't they? I know, Ashley, you've said about Angie before on another podcast, but Freddie's always been okay with it. And we monitor his weight at home. And as soon as his weight goes up, we're like, right, Keppra we need to adjust this because we don't want seizures. So we're quite on the ball with that ourselves. I'm sure his medical team must think, no, oh gosh, taking matters into their own hands again. But Freddie has absences sometimes, normally in the warmer weather, and he will have them for a few weeks, and then we won't see any for ages. But yeah, exactly the same as Troy. And then he'll come out of it and carry on doing whatever he was doing before. It's so surreal. And I didn't even realise that was a seizure. Well, there was a lot I didn't know before I had Freddie. But yeah, he's always been fine on Keppra. We were just about to introduce another drug, actually, because he was still having a lot of infantile spasms. The steroids stopped all the spasms. He was on those for about a month, weaning on and weaning off included, when he was 8 months old. But as soon as we stopped the steroids, they came back. So then he went on to Keppra, and that reduced them but didn't stop them. So we were just about to introduce another drug, and he got, I think it was hand, foot and mouth, and he was in hospital and he was really poorly, and you shouldn't introduce another drug when they're sick. So we waited for him to get better, and he didn't have it, and all of a sudden they'd stopped. So we just kept him on the Keppra, and then as he's got bigger, absences come and go. So he has dystonia as well, but he's not medicated for that because it's not, it doesn't cause him pain, and the medication for that is not ideal for a child who's got hypotonia, because it would just make him even more floppy to relax him. So that's something that it happens more at night, but that's something I fear will get worse as things change in his brain, and I'm not looking forward to, because I don't want to have to give him a medication because it's a choice of one thing or the other, and either thing is a bad thing. Do you know what I mean? All the medications he's on at the moment are a positive because they increase his quality of life for the better. It's not a case of weighing one thing up against the other, and neither of them are very nice options.
Yeah. Well, you had mentioned what was the medication that you give him for drooling and secretions?
Glycopyrronium bromide.
Okay. Yeah, because Troy drools a lot as well, and we've had many things mentioned to us, like Botox and different things. And like you were saying, for us, we're just like, well, we don't want to give him one more medication necessarily. But it was funny. We went to the dentist, and she was like, well, it's actually pretty good that he drools because he's constantly cleaning out his mouth, so he's not getting as many cavities. I'm like, there's a positive, instead of just drool falling all over my face all the time. And so, yeah, we definitely might look into that later, just to, it's very much a social thing, I think, too, sometimes, but.
Well, initially, Freddie was given a hyacinth patch. Have you heard of those? Little sticky you put behind the ear, and it controls the secretions like that. But it made his eczema really, really bad, and he would just frantically pull at his ears. But the new drug he's on, the Glyco, is a liquid, and you can fluctuate it. So he has a dose, but if he's coldy, we can either increase it or decrease it, depends on if we need him to flush out, and the response is instant, whereas the hyacinth dried everything up. Whereas what he's on now, we've fluctuated it a lot recently because of hay fever. We just do it enough so that he doesn't choke on his secretions. So it's just enough so that to keep them under control. But if we think his nose is a bit blocked, we will decrease it right down, or even not give it to him, so that mucus can loosen up and he can clear his airways properly. So I really prefer it compared to what they put him on initially, because that was not nice. That dried up everything, and he suffered with that, and we had no control over what was happening to him.
That's interesting. That sounds much better, because I know the drug that our doctor suggested was not what you had mentioned, and he said it dried up everything, and that scared me. I was like, well, I don't know if I want to dry up everything. So that sounds like that's much more beneficial.
Yeah, I think sadly, I think it's a case of a bit of trial and error to find out what's right for your child. And for a lot of people that does apply to epilepsy medication as well, because some of them do have awful side effects.
Yeah, I think, you mean, when you get your diagnosis, it's true, you become the nurse, the doctor, the researcher, the scientist, all of the things that you never dreamed would be part of your life. But it's crazy how normal that gets, and each day you wake up and you're like, I don't know about this one. It might it's especially like you're talking about with hay fever and sinuses and allergies and all of that. You have all these different factors, and you know your child the best because you're with them. So it is important to listen to doctors, but it's also important to listen to yourself, because you do know your child, and you know what they're going through, and what is normal and what is not.
Exactly. And I think the other thing is, it's doctors are good for some questions, but fellow Mito mums are better for the rest of them. And I know we started this and you said that you found me on Instagram, and I never Googled when we got Freddie's diagnosis. I mean, we were explicitly told not to. And if we had questions, to go to medical professionals only. And it was very variable, and we would see awful things if we Googled. So the first thing I did was type in hashtags into Instagram to try and find, and I found someone. And I just remember watching her videos of her daughter, and it gave me hope. And at that time, that's what I needed. I needed hope, but I needed reality as well. I needed someone to say, this is the reality of our life. It's not perfect, but it's not as bad as you think it is going to be right now. And that's why I started writing about Freddie, and that's why I started sharing his journey. Our life isn't perfect. I love him more than anything. It's hard, but you have this gratitude for it and this thankfulness for it. And I wanted to connect with other people who didn't know what to do after they heard those words, and didn't know where to turn, and didn't know. And I messaged this mum saying, we've just been told my son has mitochondrial disease. And I think it was just that. And I don't know what to do. And you just need someone to take your hand, whether it's virtually or however, and say, it's not okay, but we're in it together. And I think, and as amazing as Freddie's medical team are, and they are wonderful, it's my mum friends and my community. They're the ones who pick me up. They're the ones who answer, my messages at whatever time with my questions, and know how I'm feeling before I even say how I'm feeling. And I know you guys have that too.
That's exactly why I wanted to start this podcast, is for everything that you just said. It is very important to listen to doctors and to hear what they have to say, but it is the other moms that are going to know what to do, and that have already experienced day-to-day life. And that goes for not just your Mito cocktail or symptoms, but it also goes for education. It goes for therapy. It goes for resources that are available to you in what other country, state, city, town that you live in. When we do a 5K here, and whenever we got together, there was always something that popped up that a mom didn't know about, or another mom suggested, and we were like, what is that? So that's why we did this podcast, is because we know it's a rough road, and it's not paved. It's a bunch of trails that go all over this mountain, and you have to find the right trail. And if you find another mom on that trail, they're not going to leave you there and tell you to go another direction. They're going to hold your hand and walk the trail with you, because they have either walked it before and know the direction, or they haven't and they don't want you to be alone. And that's kind of what this whole, all of Mito is we are all in our own journeys, but we don't have to be it alone.
And I think so much information. I know, gosh, Ashley and I have known each other for a couple years now, but just even I've had a child with Mito for 12 years, and there's things where I'm like, what? You guys are doing that? Or, oh, you're trying that? Or I've never heard of that before. It's definitely, you learn so much that I didn't learn from any doctors. I mean, I've had a Mito specialist that's one of the top in the United States ever since Troy was 2 years old. And there's still things where just by talking to other moms that I've learned that are beneficial that you can try out. Or even like I stay home and I actually, am paid to take care of Troy, where before I didn't even know that existed. And it's, there's just so many different things that are so helpful that you learn by talking to other moms, other families that are going through this. So, yeah.
And I think with other mums, it's easier to open up conversations, and things don't always work for everyone. Like, for example, Keppra, but I've found personally with medical professionals, you might get different answers depending on who you're speaking to, but there's no further dialogue there, and there's no further, well, this works for some people, that works for other people. That's just your answer, and you're expected to take that answer and go with it, and that's the only thing. And this is what's happened at the weekends that I mentioned earlier before, is you speak to two different professionals and they give you different answers, and you come away and you're just like, but now I'm really confused. And then you go and sit down with the mums for a coffee and you're like, so I've just asked this question and Dr. So-and-so said this and Dr. So-and-so said that, and now I don't know what to do. And then it opens up the dialogue and they're like, oh, right, and this did this for me. And you're like, oh, okay, now I understand. Now I have more context. Now I know what I'm going to do, and that's the beauty of it.
Is there anything else that you would like to talk about, or anything that you wanted to tell the listeners that maybe you didn't get a chance to yet?
I don't think so. Have I talked enough for you guys? Have I said the sort of things you want me to say?
Absolutely. You've been wonderful.
It's not about like what we want to hear, what we want to talk about. It's like we were just talking about. We just want to hear people's stories, because I think that in itself helps other families to understand what they're getting into or what steps they need to take. And like, for example, you were talking about Freddie lost his ability to show emotions at one time, and I hear that so often. Angie too, she lost her ability to show emotions, and actually it was when she was on Keppra, but as soon as we were able to get her the G-tube and she started getting better nutrition and we were able to control supplements and things that she was getting, she never cried again, but she could show emotions. She told you when she was mad, or she told you when she was happy. I was never confused about what she was trying to tell me. She was just really happy, and we just got at that point we were able to understand the difference between her loss of emotion and her choice to not cry. But also with talking about temperatures have a lot to do with Mito, whether it's really hot or it's really cold. And so there are a lot of things that show similarities between, everybody's got different symptoms and we all have different genetic results. And I think that's also why it's important to talk about, we've talked about Lee syndrome a lot, and eventually we are going to branch out, but I think it's important because as Lee syndrome, there's so many different types of it. There's not one kind. And so, yes, it has the same name, but it's not the same disease almost, because each gene is drastic. I mean, we talked to someone who was in his 30s that has Lee syndrome, and each type just has so many. It has a different life expectancy or different types of symptoms, but there are also similarities across the board too. And I think even though we talk about Lee syndrome a lot, it's the takeaway of any mito diagnosis, because they all are similar. They all have those things that using the word again is just similarities. Just because we don't have the same gene or same diagnosis doesn't mean that it's not, that disease doesn't affect you in the same way.
And I think with Lee syndrome specifically, the reason it comes up so much is because it's almost, as opposed to it being a specific diagnosis, it's a subcategory of mitochondrial disease because it covers so many individual mutations, effectively different versions. But you're right, they overlap in symptoms. So when people say Lee syndrome, people who don't live in our world presume they're all talking about exactly the same condition, and you have to try and explain it further. But yeah, I never knew something could be so complicated. And then I was told my son had mitochondrial disease.
And that's the other part of it too. It, like you were saying, you'd never heard of it. Well, I had never heard of it either, and nobody in my family or just life knew what mitochondria even was. And it's so crazy to think that we don't know what that is. How? It's 90% of your energy source. How does every single person have 90% of their energy come from this? And we've never heard the word.
I know. Go ahead. I was just going to say, I was a 7th grade science teacher for 15 years, and we covered the mitochondria. And as soon as I had Troy, I was like, my kids are not leaving this classroom unless they understand the mitochondria. They know how it works. They know what it does. They know about mitochondrial disease. It was like, this is, yeah, like you said, how do we not know? It's so important, and it affects so many other diseases. So, just aging in general, it's like, how is this not, common knowledge? But it is not, even for doctors, it's just.
You don't even get that lesson in nursing school. I just don't get it. I don't understand how something that affects so much couldn't even have a couple of hours or a day in nursing school or medical school. It just doesn't make sense to me of how we could not cover that.
Well, you say that not all doctors know about it, and we took Freddie to our local doctor for, I can't remember, it was probably a chest infection or something. And I remember the doctor turning around to me and saying, I've never, at that time, I should say, there was a child in the press here who was, his name was Charlie. His parents were trying to fundraise to take him to America for treatment. So it was all over our media. It was everywhere. And our doctor had obviously seen about Charlie, and we took Freddie, and bearing in mind Freddie had been under him since he was born. And I remember he said to me, I'd never heard of this before, Freddie, and now all of a sudden it's everywhere, isn't it? And I was just a bit dumbfounded that he'd said that, when you've looked after him for 2 years, but now it's been in the media and you're reading more about it. But more importantly, to put it kind of in you did medical school for 7 years and you still have no idea. And I'm still telling you about my son because you're just treating him like any other child. And I'm telling you, I think he needs to go to hospital actually, and perhaps we shouldn't be here. But yeah, it's I think James calculated once in terms of diagnosis and doctors and things, and over here, like, a doctor will come across a child with that diagnosis once every 70 years, so basically once in their career, on the basis of how many children were actually getting the diagnosis. And as we know, not it takes a long time. Perhaps they don't get it. Perhaps they get misdiagnosed. So it kind of makes sense. And we've been to appointments before where other doctors have come in and said, oh, we've heard about Freddie. Do you mind if we meet him? We've never met a child like him before. And there was a phase where we just felt like we were in a zoo because everyone was being brought over to meet him, and then sitting down and saying, do you mind if we ask you questions, and asking us lots of questions about him, which is lovely. And you want to educate as much, and the fact that they want to talk to the parents directly because they know the most is wonderful. But there's also an element of you're there to see a professional as well, and you want to extract knowledge from that professional, and actually sometimes emotionally you're not in a place where you want to have your brain picked apart about it. I just need to switch over to, I need to unplug this.
Yeah, I think also it's hard with doctors, especially older doctors. Their education kind of stops if they don't have a child, or if they don't have a diagnosis that comes into their career. They don't really continue that education. And I came across a few times with a couple of doctors that had old education. The biggest example is that this is not, there are different ways that this can be inherited. It's not necessarily maternally inherited. Yes, ours is, because that's the gene that was affected, but even that, it's not 100%. It can come from the father's side. It can come from a mixture of just a 1 in a million chance that two people met and their genetics, what came over didn't work out, or there was a clash, or something is missing. And there's just so many different levels, and it is very fascinating when you go through that, and it's hard to understand that a doctor would know that now. And we've talked about in other podcasts, just over the last 10 years, there's just so much that has happened in 10 years or even 5 years. And that's part of the reason why I think Megan started doing genetic testing again, because the last time that it was all done was with old research, and now we have new things. And it's definitely important to always expand your education, and always, and as a parent, to continually try to learn these things, because what you knew a couple of years ago is old. Technology changes so much, and yes, we might not be close to a cure, but we are closer to different things that will hopefully lead to a cure in the future. But at least right now, it's the understanding of breaking things down and figuring out just genetics in general.
Yeah, like Troy's doctor, the geneticist that we saw, said you wouldn't have received these results 10 years ago. So Troy's been going without this diagnosis. He was born with the Malin syndrome. So he's just been Lee-like for so long. And now obviously the, genetic tests have improved so much that he has a completely different diagnosis now that is his primary disease. And so it's amazing to see how far we've come and the advancements in the medical field and genetic testing. And it is important, it's important for, even if there's no cure, or, just to know what your child has, it's an important thing.
Well, we want to.
For Mito, it is an exciting time, which sounds weird to say, but it is, because research has come on so far. And I remember when we left Freddie's appointment for the specific diagnosis, and my husband turned around to me and said, well, if it's going to be anything, we would rather it's rare, because then they will be putting money into it, they will be researching, they will be doing everything they can, instead of thinking they already know, and they already know everything. And it's so many, even since Freddie's diagnosis, so many exciting things have happened in terms of fertility progression and diagnosis. And it is quite exciting to know where it could go in the future, it's bittersweet.
Absolutely. Well, we want to thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you taking your evening and talking to us.
Yes, it was so nice to meet you.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like I could just talk to you two forever. I feel like, can we do this every week?
I know. I was thinking the same thing. There were so many things that you were saying that I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel the exact same way she does.
100%, absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you everyone for tuning in and listening to the podcast. We hope that we were able to bring another story, or maybe something that was similar that is happening in your life. If you have any questions, or if you want to suggest any topics or anyone that you would like us to talk to, please email us at mitopodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on at Facebook and Instagram. We will try to get back to you as fast as we possibly can on any of those platforms. But again, thank you so much for listening to us. It's because of you that we can continue to reach out and hear these stories. And it's important to be able to get them out so that others can hear that you're not on this journey alone. So thank you again, and we hope that you have a great day.